And we're watching Al 24 News World News program. I'm your host, Melissa Jimenez. Into the headlines. Leaders from around the world continue to address the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, and conflict in Ukraine highlights the widening gap between the West and the East. President of the government, Pedro Sanchez, reiterates Spain's support for finding a political solution in Western Sahara. Also coming up, 4 areas of Ukraine have started on Friday to vote in referendums on joining Russia. For the first time since 2017, a U.S. aircraft carrier arrives in South Korea for a joint naval exercise. Leaders from around the world are continuing to address the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Conflict in Ukraine highlighted the widening gap between the West and the East. More with Hossein Barkan.
The UN General Assembly, in its 77th version, continues its series of speeches in which positions are set on issues such as Ukraine, terrorism, and climate change. Mexican Foreign Minister criticized the handling of the war in Ukraine by the UN Security Council as he addressed the United Nations General Assembly on Thursday.
The Security Council, it has to be said, has not been able to fulfill its United Nations Charter mandate, having failed to prevent the war nor taken the measures to stop the armed conflict. Even less has it managed to direct any diplomatic process to reach a solution by way of dialogue and negotiation.
Amid the threat of a fresh unrest in the Kosovo region, Serbia's leader appealed for sympathy by comparing his country's situation to that of Ukraine.
We could hear from many speakers the stories about aggression and violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine. Many say that this was the first conflict on the European soil after the World War II. But the truth that the territorial integrity of a country in Europe, Serbia, as a matter of fact, which did not attack any other sovereign country, was violated, is constantly unspoken.
Africa also had its share of discussion. Umaro Sissoko Embalo, president of Guinea-Bissau, warned the international community that terrorism, violent extremism, and transnational crime in the Sahel regions threaten peace in the world.
The stability of much of our continent in general, and West Africa in particular, is threatened by insecurity caused by terrorism, violent extremism, and transnational crime, which violate the principles of the rule of law and democracy.
Never has the international order seemed so fractured, and the conflict in Ukraine has revealed a new map of global power relations. The General Assembly once again failed to reach its main objective, which is to place the World Organization back at the center of the international political game.
The president of the government, Pedro Sanchez, has reiterated Spain's support for finding a political solution in Western Sahara within the framework of the UN Charter and the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council during his speech this Thursday before the 77th United Nations General Assembly in New York. This comes as exports from Spain to Algeria have experienced a historic drop since the beginning of the Algerian boycott of Spanish companies after Pedro Sanchez's sudden change in position regarding Western Sahara.
We must leave the conflicts of the past century behind. That is why, as regards Western Sahara, Spain supports a mutually acceptable political solution in the framework of the UN Charter and Security Council resolutions. In this regard, we fully support the work of the UN Secretary Special Envoy, work that we deem to be absolutely crucial. Spain will also continue to support the Sahrawi population in the refugee camps, as it always has done, as the principal international donor, as the main international donor of humanitarian assistance in this context.
Mohamed Yunus al-Menfi, the president of the Presidential Council, claimed during the 77th session of the General Assembly in the UN of the UN that after several rounds of dialogue, the different stakeholders in Libya have not yet reached an agreement on the constitutional rules for the parliamentary and presidential election. Menfi stressed that Libya is still trying to build its state institutions and consolidate the principles of democracy, and that Libyans gave the government hope to keep moving forward to realize this dream.
Libya is still trying to build its state's institutions and consolidate the principles of democracy. The Libyan people have demonstrated to the entire world that they represent a unified nation. And in spite of the challenges, the Libyan people, thanks to its clairvoyance, tolerance, continue to work for a united country. They give us a determination and hope to keep moving forward, to realize their aspirations, build a state and pave the way to stability and prosperity.
Libyan Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeiba called on Thursday to find alternative solutions in the case where Chamber of Representatives and the High Council of State would not be able to agree on a consensual constitutional basis in a position to allow for the next election. He claimed that his government was determined to organize general elections to bring stability to the country, stressing that the international community understands the need to find a roadmap to elections without delay and without letting no party stand in the way.
The Prime Minister stressed that the government of national unity is determined to realize the dream of all Libyans, which is to hold elections. He stressed the need for consensus between the State Council and the deputies in order to prepare the necessary constitutional rule, which has always been the obstacle to holding elections in accordance with law that satisfy everyone and fair. He also emphasized on the importance of having other alternative solutions in the event that the Chamber of Representatives and the High Council of State would not be able to agree on constitutional basis in a position to allow for the next election.
The Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune extended an invitation to Ilham Aliyev, the current head of the non-aligned movement. Algerian Foreign Minister Ramtan Al-Amamra handed a letter of invitation to his Azerbaijani counterpart, Oglu Bayramov, on the sidelines of their participation in the work of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. A statement by the Algerian Foreign Ministry indicated that the meeting between Al-Amamra and his Azerbaijani counterpart was an opportunity for consultation and coordination on the prospects for embodying President Abdelmajid Tebboune's initiative aimed at activating the role of the non-aligned movement. Algerian Foreign Minister Ramtan Al-Amamra participated Thursday in the meeting of the Arab Ministerial Contact Group on the crisis on Ukraine with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The meeting comes on the sidelines of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York to discuss the latest developments in the crisis in Ukraine and the prospects for enabling Moscow and Kiev to resume negotiations in order to reach a political solution that guarantees an end to the crisis. 4 areas of Ukraine have started on Friday to vote in referendums on joining Russia. Voting takes place in Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. However, NATO and the EU reject the election process, calling it fake and illegal. The Russian government has stressed that this process is an opportunity for people in the 4 areas to express their views. The UN Security Council has turned into an event of trade and blames. US Secretary of State called the international community to hold the Russian president accountable for the war in Ukraine. For his part, the Russian foreign minister defended his country's acts. Nabil Khazini tells us the details.
A very special moment for discussions. Tensions in the ground in Ukraine had their shadow inside the hall of the headquarters of the United Nations Security Council, transforming it into an event for trading blames. Speaking first, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on the international community to hold the Russian President Vladimir Putin accountable for the war in Ukraine, calling on every member of the UN Security Council to send a clear message to Russia that nuclear threats must stop immediately.
Defending Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is about much more than standing up for one nation's right to choose its own path, fundamental as that right is. It's also about protecting an international order where no nation can redraw the borders of another by force. Every Council member should send a clear message that these reckless nuclear threats must stop immediately.
His Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, present in the council room, did not, however, sit at the same table as the other ministers to listen to their speeches. He was replaced by a deputy before leaving earlier than the end of the session. He also made a speech where he rejected Western accusations regarding the war in Ukraine and demanded in return that the Ukrainian government be held accountable.
Instead of pushing the Kiev authorities to implement the Minsk Agreement, Berlin, Paris and Washington cynically ignored the growing threats of Kiev to resolve problems of Donbass by force, the so-called Plan B.
For his part, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an investigation into the catalogue of cruelties taking place in Ukraine, as he puts it.
The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been documenting the unacceptable impact of this war on human rights. The reports are a catalogue of cruelty, summary execution, sexual violence, torture and other inhumane and degrading treatment against civilians and prisoners of war. The latest accounts of burial sites in Izium are extremely disturbing. All these allegations must be thoroughly investigated to ensure accountability.
No one expects the Council to act against Russia since Moscow has veto power as a permanent member. However, the meeting was still a rare moment for top diplomats from Ukraine and Russia to appear in the same room.
Countries within the European Union have invested a total of close to 500 billion euros to tackle their energy crisis and alleviate the following impacts on their residents. Sofiane Kantouri reports.
The rise in energy prices caused by the Ukraine conflict pushed European countries to look for measures to cope with the crisis amid growing pressures. The European Union as a whole has committed close to 5 billion euros to resolving their energy crisis and minimizing the following effects on their citizens.
Crisis intervention is now necessary to secure our gas supply in Germany economically and to protect consumers from an uncontrollable situation. That's why the state now has a temporary stake in the Uniper company and has now taken it over, in large part because of the enormous increase in economic risks there, which would no longer have been borne privately.
The continuous worsening European energy crisis has pushed up energy prices, seriously affecting people's livelihood and production activities and causing widespread concerns.
Electricity prices are more than 4 times what they used to be, and this is also a problem for the entire Europe.
Energy bill in an average Italian family, mainly for gas and electricity, jumped to 5% of total household expenses by July 2022, from 3.5% in 2019. This rise in energy prices has shut down production and cut back the competitiveness of Italy's manufacturing.
We can see that energy costs have already influenced the competitiveness of our products. To offset the increase in energy costs, the prices of our products need to go up accordingly. We're no longer competitive in the international market compared with other regions.
The largest economy in the bloc, Germany, has invested more than 100 billion euros since the crisis began, compared to Italy's investment of just over 59 billion. Estonia, on the other hand, has only set aside 200 million euros.
Armenia and Azerbaijan accused each other of opening fire overnight on Friday, breaking a fragile ceasefire agreement that had brought the worst fighting between the two ex-Soviet countries since 2020 to a close last week. In statements issued by both defense ministries, Baku and Yerevan each accused the other side of firing first in renewed clashes along their shared border. According to the Syrian and Lebanese governments, dozens of people have died after a boat carrying migrants and refugees from Lebanon capsized off Syria's coast. This is one of the deadliest incidents since surging numbers of migrants have tried to flee crisis-hit Lebanon by sea to Europe. After leaving a path of destruction on several Caribbean islands, including Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, Hurricane Fiona strengthened to a powerful Category 4 storm, leaving the majority of people without power and at least 8 people dead. More with Sofiane Kantouri.
The majority of Puerto Rico was without power on Sunday due to Hurricane Fiona, which also caused catastrophic flooding and landslides on the island before making its way toward the Dominican Republic. 5 years after Hurricane Maria devastated the island, storm hit Puerto Rico that tore up roads' asphalt, destroyed a significant bridge, shut down airports, flooded cars, and dumped so much rain that some rivers rose 20 feet in a matter of hours.
I have lots of water, snacks, canned meat, not so many perishables, mostly non-perishables I purchased for the storm. My doors, because I am right on South Shore, like there,
Right.
and up high. So my patio doors, or my veranda doors, whatever, are already boarded up. They've been boarded since Tuesday.
U.S. President Joe Biden pledged support to Puerto Rico on Thursday at a meeting with the federal emergency officials on the sideline of the United Nations General Assembly.
We're all in this together, I promise you, Gov. We don't view this as some distant problem. And power is slowly returning, but it's returning, and more help is coming from utilities and the mainland. And we got water and other supplies available as well, and there's still dozens of shelters that are still available and open.
While Puerto Rico struggles to recover from the hurricane, which dumped up to 30 inches of rain in some areas, neither local nor federal government officials have offered any estimates of the storm's damage. According to the U.S. National Hurricane Center, Fiona was expected to pass close to Bermuda early Friday, before making landfall early on Saturday in eastern Canada.
A protest to demand justice for 43 Mexican students who disappeared in 2014 turned violent on Tuesday, leaving 11 police officers injured. A confrontation took place outside the Attorney General's office in Mexico City after demonstrators gathered calling for people linked to the case to be arrested.
The Attorney General should tell us why he delayed the execution of the arrest warrant. Far from it, the police force is being deployed to prevent us from reaching the doors of the Attorney General's office.
Britain's new government on Friday announced a sweeping plan of tax cuts it said would be funded by borrowing and revenues generated by anticipated growth as part of contentious moves to combat the cost of living crisis and bolster a faltering economy. But Treasury Chief Kwasi Kwarteng offered few details on the cost of the program and its impact on the government's own targets for reducing deficits and borrowing.
We need a new approach for a new era, focused on growth. Our aim over the medium term is to reach a trend rate of growth of 2.5%. And our plan, Mr. Speaker, is to expand the supply side of the economy through tax incentives and reform.
The United States imposed sanctions on Iran's morality police over allegations of abuse of Iranian women, saying it held the unit responsible for the death of a 22-year-old in custody that has sparked protests around Iran. The U.S. Treasury Department also accused the morality police of violating the rights of peaceful protesters and said it had imposed sanctions on 7 senior Iranian military and security officials, including the chief of the Iranian army's ground forces. The Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi warned protesters who have taken to the country's streets in rage over the death of a woman in the morality police custody on Thursday that acts of chaos are not acceptable. Speaking at a news conference on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Raisi denounced the hypocrisy of Western powers and added that he had ordered an investigation into the cause or the case of Mahsa Amini, who died last week after being arrested for wearing unsuitable attire.
The Islamic Republic of Iran rejects some of the double standards of some governments vis-à-vis human rights and sees that as the most important factor which has rendered banal the topic of human rights in the eyes of many. because this is something that is currently taking place, a discourse that is taking place in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where we started speaking of and creating a dialogue about the deaths of tens of innocent women in a Western country. So until we have these double standards where attention is solely focused on one side and not all equally, we will not have true justice and fairness. Human rights belong to all, but unfortunately is trampled upon by many governments.
For the first time since 2017, a U.S. aircraft carrier arrived in South Korea for a joint naval exercise. The nuclear-powered USS Ronald Reagan reached the port of Busan on Friday as the two countries prepare for a drill aimed at showing strength in the face of rising threats from neighboring North Korea. Southern Italy is still plagued by poverty and joblessness, which is seen the hardest in years. Many families struggle with the cost of living. Giorgia Meloni vowed to end poverty if she wins Sunday's elections. However, many voters in the southern region fear things could get worse. Islam Said reports.
Poverty and unemployment levels are increasing in southwestern Italy, and the situation could get worse as winter approaches, especially in the Campania region. In Salerno, many people have to rely on the Caritas soap kitchen because they do not have enough money to pay their rent, bills and food.
I have a very small pension. I pay my rent, I pay my electricity bill, and I have nothing left for food. That's the situation.
A recent study indicates that 1 in 13 people is at risk of extreme poverty. The whole province and the city of Salerno itself are facing a particularly complicated situation after the pandemic and the war.
As the general election approaches in Italy, many voters in the country's south feel they have been abandoned by successive governments in recent years, despite promises of far-right leader Giorgia Meloni to abolish poverty if she wins. Many people fear things will only get worse.
If Meloni wins and cancels the citizenship income, there will be an influx of people here.
I don't know if I'm going to vote or who am I going to vote for. I have until Sunday to decide.
Based on recent government study, in 2021 there were more migrants and refugees in Italy who had found employment. The labor market participation of immigrants and refugees increased and is currently quite similar to pre-pandemic levels. However, more immigrant households are now struggling to make ends meet.
Workers round up hundreds of dead pilot dolphins and prepare them to be towed out to sea for disposal after a stranding that killed around 200 on a beach in Tasmania and Nile in the south of Australia. Officials said there were still at least 3 stranded cetaceans alive that would be the focus of rescue efforts today as collection of dead animals continues.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a significant event. Like, as you can see behind, it's very, it's extremely sad to see these beautiful, intelligent animals, on land where they're not meant to be. Unfortunately, this time a big proportion of them haven't made it. But I think in terms of the community, it's just a real sense of pride and, also a sense of achievement and just that everyone's collaborating and working well together. And I think that's, for us as a salmon industry in Tasmania, that's what we really are.
And now to a reminder of our top stories. Leaders from around the world continue to address the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, and conflict in Ukraine highlights the widening gap between the West and the East. President of the government Pedro Sanchez reiterates Spain's support for finding a political solution in Western Sahara. Also in our news, 4 areas of Ukraine have started on Friday to vote in referendums on joining Russia. And for the first time since 2017, a U.S. aircraft carrier arrives in South Korea for a joint naval exercise. For that's it for today's World News. For more news stories, don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Thank you for watching and goodbye.